the third time I've tried to start this video. Oh boy. Hey guys, and welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be talking about something a little bit different. I'm going to be talking about essentially all of the media that I've been consuming. So the books I've been reading, podcasts, TV shows, movies. I don't think I have any movies on here, but music, apps, that kind of thing. Originally I was just going to try to tie in some of these things into like a favorites video, but I realized I had a lot more to talk about than I do with the other favorites. So what I'm gonna do is do a video like this and then also do like a beauty and lifestyle type of favorites. So let me know if this is interesting to you, and I might make it a series, but we'll see. So since I haven't done any kind of favorites or anything like this, really this is kind of from the past couple months what I have been consuming. So in terms of books go, I mainly listen to audiobooks over like reading physical books. It just takes me a lot longer to get through a physical book, whereas an audiobook I can get through like within a week, and a physical book it'll sometimes take me months. So there is one book that I physically like read, but the rest are audiobooks that I listen to. I talked about this in a few videos ago recently. The app called OverDrive. I think I said OneDrive in that video. That is not what it is. That's a Microsoft thing. It's called OverDrive, and it allows you to access audiobooks and regular books through your local library for free. So that's mainly where I've been listening to these. So the first book I want to talk about is The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander. So this is a book examining mass incarceration in the United States. She's very, very thorough in her research and in the way that she explains everything. Kind of the first part of the book is going through historical context, how this all happened, kind of going back all the way to the 13th Amendment, and then how prisons are operating today. And then the second half of the book, she goes more in depth into how this is affecting our society today, about how it's affecting families, and about how the system is operating, and also talking about avenues for change. So I think if you're wanting to learn about mass incarceration, I think this is a very good place to start. I know a lot of people have been recommending the documentary 13th, which I've watched as well, and I think that that is a good introduction into this kind of systemic problem, but The New Jim Crow is a lot more comprehensive, and I think that it's a good it's a good book to get some historical context and just a little bit more understanding of these systems that we have in place. So yeah, so it's really, really great. It is long, but again, it's pretty comprehensive, and it's, I think, really an important read for everyone right now. So the next book I want to talk about is So You Want to Talk About Race by Ijeoma Oluo. And this is kind of more of an, I guess, opinion-based read, and what she talks about is kind of her experience as a Black woman, as an activist, and also just examining the conversations that we are having and that we should be having about racial issues and racism, particularly in the United States. And she really, I think that this is a book that all white people should read, or really all non-Black people should read, because she's very direct, and she examines all of these questions that I think a lot of people ask are maybe uncomfortable to talk about for some people, but why they're important to talk about. So she talks about, for example, like what is intersectionality, and really diving into what that actually means, and not just kind of this word that we throw around, but what it means to have a convergence of identities, of different privileges, different barriers that different facets of our identities face. And obviously she's talking as a Black woman. She also is from Seattle, and I'm from the Seattle area as well, so it was kind of cool to see her experience in this environment, the same environment that I grew up in, and the differences and similarities there. And then part of her book, she really directly addresses white people. And again, she is just very frank, very to the point. She does not mince words, and I think that that's fantastic and really, really needed, especially right now. So yeah, I think that that is definitely a must read, especially if you are trying to be an ally right now. So the one book that I did physically read was, my friend had a copy and I borrowed it, and it's Between the World and Me by Ta-Nehisi Coates, and it's written as an open letter to his son, but through it he kind of tells his experience as a black man in America. I think he's a writer for The Atlantic, and he's a journalist and activist, so he has a lot of knowledge within that space. The book itself is just beautifully written. The way he writes is so poetic and it's so just engaging to read. So I think it is one of the books that I would recommend physically reading, just because it's so beautifully written. So if you're someone that really appreciates sort of the artistry of the literary process, I think that you would really, really enjoy this book as well. And it's a very powerful story, and through it you really kind of see his perspective as a black man, as a father, as somebody who's navigating the world and the relationships that he has with other people and with his son. It's a really beautiful story, and I think like it's also a really, really important and good read. So the other couple books I read those are kind of the non-fiction books that I've read, and then I also read some fiction books. So the first one, I listened to the first Percy Jackson book. So with all the shit happening with J.K. Rowling, I've been like craving a less problematic childhood fantasy type of story. So anyway, so I decided to listen to this book. I think I read a couple of the books like when I was really young, and then of course I saw the movie, which I know a lot of people don't like and say it's totally nothing like the books, which I agree. And it was really fun and enjoyable to listen to. It's a fun sort of coming of age fantasy type hero story, so it was kind of cool to just dive back into that. And then the other two fiction books that I read are The Hate U Give and Color Me In. So The Hate U Give is by Angie Thomas. It's the story of a young black teenager basically who's just sort of, it is a coming of age story, but it kind of puts it in this context of issues of police brutality and how she experiences them personally, and you see her kind of growth as a character, as a teenager, as a young girl, and kind of into this sort of activist role as well. And it's a really, really powerful story, and again, I think just really like highlights her experience as a young black girl in America, and I think it is also a really important read. I know they made a movie a couple years ago. I have not seen it, so I'd love to see the movie as well and see kind of how it compares, but yeah, that was really, really good. So then the other book that I read, or that I listened to, The Hate U Give I listened to as well, was Color Me In by Natasha Díaz, and this is a story about a biracial girl who's half black and half white and Jewish, and kind of her experience navigating this intersectionality and navigating both the privileges that she holds and this sort of feeling of not belonging anywhere. Again, it is sort of like a coming of age type story and just kind of her experience in this role. The book is very much based off of the author's own life, even though it is written as fiction. She has kind of a section at the end where she talks about this as the author, and the author reads it herself in the audiobook, which I think is cool. But yeah, it's a really, really good story, really engaging story, and kind of a good look at this intersection, which we don't really talk about very much, of being both Black and Jewish. Okay, so those are all the books that I have been listening to and reading as of late, and I thoroughly enjoyed all of them and loved all of them, and I think they're really, really great books. So now let's move on to TV shows, the TV shows that I've been watching. So the first one is Kipo. Oh, I love this show so much. So it's in this sort of, it's an animated series. I think two of the ones I'm going to talk about are animated series. I think it is technically a kid's show, but it's very good. Like, you would appreciate it as an adult. Anyway, so it's in this sort of like not so distant future where basically the surface has become uninhabitable. Something happened where all of the animals kind of mutated. Some of them have become like totally sentient. Others are just like huge now. Like, there's giant bunnies and they have like multiple limbs and like all this crazy stuff. And a lot of the humans, or most of the humans, have moved underground and are living in burrows. So basically the premise of the story is her burrow gets destroyed and she ends up on the surface where she runs into these other characters that have been living on the surface, and it's just a really, really cool story. I love the animation style. The soundtrack, beautiful. Like, the music in it is so cool, and I just love the way it's structured. It's a really, really fun kind of adventure story. So yeah, I'd highly recommend that if you're looking to something to watch. It's a really, really fun and cool story. And the next one that I just finished season 3 of is The Dragon Prince. Oh my god, I love this show. So it's the same creators as Avatar: The Last Airbender, and you can definitely tell in the story, like, the structure is very similar. There's a lot of like similar archetypes within the characters, but it still very much feels like its own story. It's set in like a fantasy world, essentially, like a whole separate world than the real one. Obviously, that's what a fantasy world is, Carolyn. It sort of has this sort of medievally fantasy vibe to it. And basically in this story, there's kingdoms that are at odds, and these two young princes are trying to unite them by bringing home the dragon prince, who's this little baby dragon, back to his mother. And that's essentially the premise, but it's like way more than that. I don't know how to describe things without like giving too much away, you know? But it's a really, really good, and it also has, it is an animated series, but it has one of like the most diverse character depictions that I've seen in an animated show, particularly one in that sort of medieval fantasy type of realm. There are a lot of Black characters. There's a character who is deaf and signs. There are LGBTQ characters, and it's just a really, really cool show. And I think that it really shows that like you can have this sort of level of diversity in a show that is still very fantasy and this like king and queen type of thing, because I feel like shows like that, even if they're completely in a fantasy world, really tend to be whitewashed, because I guess that's what we think of when we think of this sort of like European style fantasy. But when you are constructing a world that is completely different from our real one, it seems very unimaginative that there wouldn't be characters of color, gay characters, there wouldn't be characters who are deaf, characters who are disabled, and I think Dragon Prince does a really, really good job of integrating those identities into a show where it just very much feels normal for that particular world. And yeah, and it's really, it's a really, really good show. Highly recommend. Very sweet, very good, very funny, and just like a fun adventure story. And if you like Avatar, I think that you will definitely like this show as well. It's very good. So the next show that I just started watching is The Umbrella Academy, which I know a lot of people are watching right now. I'm thoroughly enjoying it. It's very entertaining to watch. I'm still like kind of constructing how I feel about it, essentially, but it is very engaging, and There's parts of it that are really funny, and it's just a cool kind of adventure superhero-y story. It's based on a comic that was written by Gerard Way, which I think is really cool. So basically the premise of the story is in 1989, a bunch of women gave birth, but they weren't pregnant at all, basically, before the day started. And all of these children have special abilities. So like one has like super strength, one can kind of like do a mind control trick basically, one can talk to the dead, that kind of thing, where they all have these special abilities. It's sort of like X-Men-y, kind of, sort of, but it's not like mutants. It's not a visible thing. It's it's an internal power, essentially. So basically this billionaire dude adopted 7 of these kids, and the story starts as them as adults now, and their father has died. So, and it kind of brings them all together, and you get to learn a little bit more about their past and their upbringing, and then they're also kind of facing this greater force now as adults, and they're finally together after years and years and years. So yeah, it's a cool story. It's very entertaining. I think that like if you are looking for something like that, like, and you like kind of superhero-y type stories, it's definitely a fun watch. Okay, podcast. So I avoided listening to podcasts for like a really long time, and I don't know why. I just figured like I just wasn't really interested in them. The show that got me interested in podcasts, which I have been listening to for a while now, is the Approachable podcast, which is Samantha Ravindell, who's a beauty YouTuber, and her best friend Alyssa, and she's also a YouTuber, but they have this podcast together where they kind of just talk about a variety of different topics, and it's called Approachable, and the idea is to kind of make these topics seem more approachable. So some of it is sort of like personal stories, some of them are really funny where they tell like travel stories or gross stories, or just like they talk about their past relationships, and it's just sort of like a cool insight into like their lives. It just kind of feels like you're like listening to friends talk. But they also talk about some important issues. They've done episodes talking about addiction, and about reproductive rights, and about climate change, and they did an episode about teen moms, and they had a friend who was a mom as a teenager kind of come on and talk about her experience. So they have like guests and stuff too, and it's just a really, really wide range of topics, and it just sort of kind of feels like a conversation, and it's really enjoyable to listen to. So that's kind of the podcast that got me into podcasts. So the other two that I've listened to are both a sort of set series podcast and an ongoing podcast, but it's the 1619 podcast, which was put on by not NPR, the New York Times, and it's looking at the history of slavery and the impact that it's had throughout history, and I think that it sort of covers the things that you don't typically learn about in a school setting, and it's a good introduction into art history, essentially. So it's I think there's like 10 episodes, I want to say, I could be wrong about that, where she basically just kind of talks about the history of slavery and Reconstruction, and kind of right after that, and I think it's a good introduction into that history if you're not super familiar with it. So yeah, it's really, really good. It's very well done. The format of the podcast, I think, is really, really cool. They have good use of sounds, and I think it's a good one to listen to. Next one is the About Race podcast by Rennie Edolodge. This is a look at racism in Britain. She has a book called Why I'm No Longer Talking to White People About Race, which I haven't read, but the podcast about race is really, really good, and it's sort of coming from her perspective as a Black woman, as a feminist, as a journalist, and an activist as well. And she covers a variety of different topics, but as a person who is raised in the United States, it is kind of a look into how racism operates in Britain, which is not something that I've really been that aware of. I knew racism existed in Britain, obviously, but like the history of it wasn't as, I didn't know as much about it as I do about the United States. So that was really interesting to get kind of a different perspective. There's some sort of historical context episodes, and then she has a couple different guests too about kind of like how to engage with activism and what are the right ways to engage with charity work and that kind of thing. So yeah, it's a really, really cool podcast. I really enjoy listening to her talk, basically. And yeah, I just kind of provided a different perspective. And that one is like a series podcast too. I think there's like 13 episodes, I want to say. I could be totally off with these numbers, but basically it's a set amount, and I just kind of listened to the whole thing through. And I think it was really, really good. So really the only new music that I've been listening to is the new Taylor Swift album, which, oh my god, what's it called? Folklore. I think this is her best album yet. It's so good. I would listen to it like start to finish. It's just, there's not one bad song. There's not one bad song on that album. Every single song is beautiful. Chef's kiss. If you haven't listened to it, I highly recommend. And then I have 2 Spotify playlists that I want to recommend. There is Floating in a Dense Forest in Oregon. This is by Nina Elizabeth Curran. I think I saw it on a TikTok video and I was like, oh, that sounds nice. It's very peaceful, calming, kind of indie music. I listened to this a lot, like when I was reading for school. And yeah, it's just calming, and I think it's really perfectly named. It really is. It feels like floating in a dense forest in Oregon. It's very kind of airy and just soft and pretty, so it's very relaxing, and it's a really, really good playlist, and it's a good kind of study playlist as well, I think. And there's also the chill lo-fi study beats, which used to be on YouTube, is also on Spotify now, which is fantastic too. And then the other playlist is by Spotify, but it's the Soak Up the Sun playlist. This is such a good, like, it just feels like summer. That's the best way I could describe it. It's sort of like a lot of kind of alternative-y, rock-ish type stuff. Not really. I don't know, it's a lot of like Sublime and like Red Hot Chili Peppers and stuff like that, which I know not everybody likes, but it's kind of that sort of vibe, and I really enjoy it. It's just really like chill and kind of feels like summer. Okay, let's talk about some apps that I've been enjoying. So the first one is called Redecor. So, oh my gosh. So my friend showed me this. It's so like silly, but basically you design different rooms essentially, and you're basically just coloring them in, but you have like a set amount of money, and you have to like buy the different materials and like design it, and then your stuff gets like voted on and ranked, and you earn different things for it. It's very silly, but like this is a little room that I designed, and it's totally blank when you first get it, but different people can do different designs. Like this isn't mine, but like that's another one somebody did. So it's just a really fun and like relaxing game. So yeah, it's been a lot of fun. It's called Redecor. So the next one is the Calm app, and this one I did actually pay for. It's $70 for a full year, which is kind of expensive, honestly, but I was like, all right, we'll try it. The main thing that I've been using this for is the sleep stories. These are literally like bedtime stories, like full on bedtime stories, but like, you know, made for adults. But I really enjoy them, and it really like helps me fall asleep. Usually I'll fall asleep before the story ends, which is awesome. I've been trying to kind of get in a little bit more of a routine, go to bed a little bit earlier, and that's really, really been helping. They're very relaxing. It kind of gives you something to listen to, but it's not like overpowering. It's very calming. So yeah, I really enjoy it. There's other things on the app. There's like guided meditations and like soundscapes, so like rain on a window, stuff like that. I haven't really played around with those too much, but I've mostly been listening to the sleep stories, but I really enjoy these. They also have like celebrities do readings, so like Harry Styles did one recently. They have like there's one from Matthew McConaughey, which I haven't listened to, but I find it's really funny. There's one from Kelly Rowland. There's one from Nick Offerman. So they have like different celebrities do these readings too, which is kind of cool. And then the next app I want to talk about is Sign School. So this is a sign language learning app, basically, sort of like Duolingo for sign language. So I took American Sign Language in high school, so I kind of learned the fundamentals, the basics of it, the structure of the language, but I've lost a lot of it, I've forgotten a lot of it, and I've, especially like specific words, I don't remember a lot of them, so I've been using this app to kind of relearn these things, and it's a very comprehensive. So I will say, if you're just learning sign language, it doesn't dive too much into the structure of the language, so I think that you might want to seek out a secondary source to kind of learn about that. But if you're like me and you're just kind of getting back into it, or you just want to learn some basics, it's very, very good. So there's a couple different categories. There's a dictionary, which is like what it says, so you can look up pretty much any word or like common phrases, stuff like that. And then letters and numbers, so this is if you're learning like the basic like finger spelling alphabet, numbers, and then topics. So these are different categories, so there's a getting started, sign school lessons, abstract ideas, close, comparisons, criminal justice, deaf culture, so like a bunch of different categories. And what I like about these is that there's review options, so like this is a color option, so basically you can kind of test your knowledge, but basically you have to select what sign is shown on the screen. So it's been really, really helpful. I feel like I've learned a lot from it, and I was really impressed with how comprehensive it is. So yeah, I'd highly recommend that app as well if you're wanting to learn some sign language or relearn some sign language as well. So, and it's specifically ASL, I should mention that, because there's different variations, but specifically ASL. Okay, and I think that is everything for today. Let me know if you enjoyed this style of video and kind of talking about some different things, just talking about different like media and stuff like that. I really enjoy talking about this stuff, so let me know if you like it too. I know it has nothing to do with makeup, but there will be more makeup videos for you soon. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoy this, and I will see you all again soon. Okay, bye!